We reported stuff.
University has a $500,000 grant to help towns with AI.
Really?
They're gonna start with the Northeast Police Department. I've been working quite a bit on the thing that'll bring the documents together, but whatever, yeah.
So you got a copy of those minutes?
That's it.
Minutes that Bruce sent out. They're on the town website regardless.
The only thing I noticed in that copy is that I wasn't here last week.
Right, I realized that when I should have changed it, yeah. Well. I should have changed it before.
Okay. So we're gonna open the meeting of May 4th, 2026. First thing I guess we'll do is approve the minutes of the last meeting. The members who were present was Jim Robert, Bruce Wheeler, Maxfield English, Tim Mateer. Seth Jensen was also present. So have all the folks who were listed, have they reviewed the minutes?
Yes.
Do I have a motion to approve or amend those minutes?
I'll make that motion.
You want to amend that?
Oh,
One about.
yeah, Michael wasn't here.
So the minutes on it have stated that Michael was here, but he actually wasn't. So,
Right.
so you'll make the motion to approve it.
Do I rescind it?
Removing of Michael's name from the members present.
Yes. And I'll send it back out for posting.
Yeah.
Yes, sure.
Any other input on the minutes? All in favor, say aye. Approving the minutes.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. Seth is not here yet. Check my email, see if he sent anything. Sent to my agenda. Hopefully. It was awful slow here for some reason.
Which, are you still hooked to the Starlink?
Sure. Starlink.
Starlink is in standby mode. You're only getting like 5 minutes down now.
See that.
We put it in standby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do we know the password on, well, we don't need to broadcast.
I think the public is there and I don't know what
That's fine.
Yeah, the fiber install went well, and so everything is on fiber now.
Great. How's the solar panel working out, do you know?
Michelle sends a monthly thing. The last 2 months, it's been underwhelming, but it's also been springtime. So
Right.
hoping we'll start seeing some changes. We did notice that Hardwick Electric was charging us the residential rates, so we got to figure out, and those are more expensive than the commercial rates, so we've got to figure out what that's all about, but.
Okay, so I did send them the agenda, so. I believe he sent that those materials afterward.
I didn't get anything.
You didn't get anything from Seth?
Oh, right there. I lied. Yes, I did.
So I think he sent that out. So I sent out the agenda on Wednesday. He sent that out on probably Thursday or Friday.
Hey, Jim,
Yes.
somebody just called my landline. My kid answered and he said there's somebody in the waiting room. Maybe that's Seth?
I mean, look,
Yep, it was Seth. Well, the name come up is something I can't read it, Jensen, so it must be him.
yeah, I see that. Get this cursor to go or. All right. Are you there, Seth?
Hello, how are you all?
Hello. Hello.
Did Seth just call? Seth, did you just call?
I did. I was calling to let them know I was in the waiting
No
room,
problem.
but I also called Maxfield and I think his son let him know too. So
He just let us know. I wasn't
Okay.
expecting anybody else in the waiting room.
okay. How are you all?
Good.
So we opened the meeting and we've approved the minutes, so we're ready to move on to what the materials that you have, so.
Great. Would you like me to share the screen so you can all see them?
Uh, you can, I have my computer here that I could probably download them if I find them. Yeah, current Wolcott zoning. Yeah, just tell me which one you're gonna go on first. Or you could share the screen too.
Okay.
I got him open too, so either
Okay.
way.
I'll try to it I know it can be funky, so I'll do it without screen share, and then if it becomes challenging, we'll figure that out. So the document that I had shared with all of you um, via email is the changes required to the bylaws by recent changes in state statute. Most of them relate to S-100, which is also called the Home Act. It was an act passed in 2023. We talked about it at some detail at the last meeting. The primary objective is encouraging housing and removing barriers to housing. As I noted, a lot of the things that towns are required to do under the Home Act, Wolcott was by and large already doing without state mandate. So I'll highlight those. There are a few areas where there are tweaks needed to meet the standards, though, and even though they're required by statute and technically supersede if there were to be an application, I do want to go through these and spend time addressing questions you have. It's clear what is and isn't required under the act. Um, there's another act that has received quite a lot of news in the press recently, and a lot of attention in the legislature. That's Act 181. These are separate acts. So I know you may, as the Planning Commission, get questions about that. There's a lot of healthy debate going on about 181 and its impact on rural communities. Um, Happy to discuss that after going through these. I just want to, um, make clear at the onset this is a different act that passed the year prior to that. Um, So the first change on page 23, this outlines oh,
You can
sorry, is
sit
there a
here.
question?
I have a question, Seth, since I don't know if
Yeah,
somebody else is asking one. Quick refresher. So in your
yes, thank
notes, you
you.
said the red is additions and the highlighted was existing but important information.
Yeah, so thank you, Maxfield. So red underlined is addition. Red with a strike through means existing language that's being removed. And then the language that's highlighted is, in this case, language that I'm just calling out because it will be a change, especially in how the DRB might review a certain application. So I wanted to call it out in case there were questions for how this might work in practice. Um, so so are there other questions before we dive into things? Happy to not. So a significant change in the Home Act, as I mentioned, is really trying to create more predictability and reduce barriers for new housing throughout Vermont. One of the provisions basically states that in the conditional use process, um, for residential uses, if conditional use is required, um, the DRB can't um, basically make the minimum lot sizes or setbacks or lot coverage or building height requirements more restrictive than what's allowed by the underlying zoning district. Um, so that can still be done for a commercial use or an industrial use under conditional use review. Um, it can't be done for residential, whether it's a single family home or a 2 unit or 4 unit. So what that means in practice is if you're reviewing an application or the DRB is reviewing an application and the setback is 20 feet as part of the conditional use process for a, say, quadplex, for example, you could not, as the DRB, say setback is 20 feet, but actually we think a 40-foot setback is needed. If there's a feeling that a greater setback is needed, that would need to be done and required for all uses within the district, not added to in the conditional use process. Um, I don't think you have had a lot of that kind of conditional use review in Wolcott. So I do want to pause to just answer questions if that makes sense or if people want clarity on how that works in practice. If not, I'm happy to keep moving along.
I did. We currently had the ability to adjust, um, like dimensional requirements. In my experience, we just kind of followed what it said in the bylaws.
That is my experience from like the limited amount of what I've read of the DRB as well. I think in some communities, I don't I haven't seen it a lot in Lamoille County, but in some communities, part of the conditional use process, they might say um, you need a greater buffer. For example. And really, where that comes into play is in communities that have more intense commercial and industrial uses. So, the say it's a industrial use on Dorset Street in South Burlington, and I hope to any people from Chittenden County listening to the recording that Dorset Street is actually in South Burlington, but and it's someone proposes something like a, you know, data center, and I'll just do that to create controversy unnecessarily. But and there's going to be a lot of noise, and the DRB takes the position based on testimony and expert witnesses that the setback needs to be greater to prevent like the vibration and noise and water impacts. It's really not a tool, even in a situation like that, intended for residential uses, but my understanding is this provision happened because some communities were using it that way. Um, so just a clarification in there. Um, okay, I will keep going along then. Um, so next thing on page 24, um, we'll talk a bit about parking later. But this is very similar that in the conditional use review process, the DRB can, for example, look at if you had a shopping center, um, and you looked at your minimum parking standards and decided more parking is going to be needed based on the type of use. That could be is a legitimate use of the conditional use review process. State statute now says you can do that for commercial uses. You can't do that for residential uses. Um, so moving along, this is probably on its face the most significant change. Page 36, the table of uses. Um, so I think for Wolcott, probably the most significant change from the Home Act is that for purposes of zoning bylaws and zoning administration, two-unit structures need to be treated the same as one-unit structures for setbacks, for required acreage, for what type of review you require. Um, and so the implication of that is in several of your districts, the rural districts, specifically the Route 15 district, the rural district, and the shoreland district, um, two-unit dwellings, so duplexes essentially, were regulated more stringently than single-family homes. They now have to be regulated in the same way. So where single family homes are permitted, two-unit dwellings need to be permitted. Where single unit dwellings are conditional, two-unit dwellings also need to be conditional. Um, so you see that change at the top of the table of uses. Um, and many of the other changes we'll talk about tonight flow from this. So I'll pause in case you have questions here.
That line stops at in a duplex. That's where
That
the
stop. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
just wanted to clarify that regulation that stops at 2 units. 3 units is regulated under multi-unit.
It does.
3 units
Yes. Yep. Yep. There is a provision in. Oh, sorry, Jim. Did you have a question?
Those two-unit dwellings are still called, we still count them as two units for density, right? Other than if they're an accessory dwelling, they're still
So
a dwelling unit.
That is a really good question, and I think that's where this becomes for Wolcott probably the most significant change. Um, those two units still now only count as you can't require more acreage for a two unit than you do for a one unit. So effectively for your density calculations, they count as one.
Really?
Yes.
That's
So
different.
that is different. That's probably the most, like I said, this most significant change. They don't count that way for septic. Um, so they still will need larger septic systems. And so in that way, to some degree, in most of Wolcott, that will cancel, you're right, out to some degree. Not entirely, um, but they do. They count as one unit now.
And I'm assuming they have to have a contiguous floor plan.
Yes, attached. Yeah. So I think that what now the primary difference now between a two unit and a single family home with an accessory dwelling is that the accessory can be attached like above a garage, for example. Um but the two unit could be owned by the same person, that could be owned by separate people. One owned and rented, so that's the structure of this. Folks have questions about that?
So, in the case of like, say somebody has a 2 acre lot in the rural area in Wolcott, that's allowed one dwelling unit and an
Mhm.
accessory dwelling unit. If they
Yeah.
were to put a two living unit, a duplex, are they still allowed that accessory dwelling unit?
So that's a really good question, Jim. The statute still defines an accessory dwelling unit as accessory to a single family home. Um, there are some communities that are allowing accessory units to two units homes, but but I don't believe that's required by the Home Act. I think that's still municipal discretion if you wanted to do that.
We should probably have that defined, whatever way we decide that, it should be printed somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And we will get to the um, accessory dwelling um, soonish, and I can make a note to define how you want to handle that. Okay. So in the packet on page 46, this is your minimum parking requirement table. Um, what your current bylaws kind of have three levels of parking requirements for parking spaces per unit that are really driven by the size of the unit in terms of bedrooms. So one units and efficiencies, or not one unit, one bedroom and efficiencies, you require um, one per dwelling unit. Two or more bedrooms, you require two per dwelling unit, and then um, senior housing with two or more, you require one and a half units. A change that the Home Act made is that towns cannot require more than one and a half parking spaces per unit. Um, and so that change is reflected here. Um, that's not a maximum, so a builder or landowner can still have more parking than is required. But you can't require more than that. Does that make sense? And I don't mean does that make sense from a policy standpoint? Does that make sense from a practical what you can and can't allow standpoint?
Yeah, I think I understand that.
Yeah,
That's kind of more applicable to multifamily units, really, isn't it?
it would
I
be.
mean, we don't
Yeah.
really regulate people's driveways,
No, no, this would come into play with like multi-dwelling units. Um, yeah,
As
you're
part
right
of like
about
the
that.
conditional use review.
Right,
Okay,
right.
yeah.
Yep. Okay. So moving on to page 49, the stormwater section. Um, this is the only change I think we'll be talking about tonight that isn't directly related to the Home Act, but I did want to bring it to your attention. When Wolcott developed its bylaws, um, the state threshold for a state stormwater permit was an acre of impervious surface. Um, in a rural communities, very few developments triggered that threshold. Uh, Wolcott had some concerns about sort of the development of roads and such that were not having any stormwater management and impacts on the other roads and waterways. So you have this requirement to do basic stormwater um, stuff, starting at half an acre of impervious surface. Um, Projects that require a state permit do not need sort of double dipping of the town under your current rules. Um, so in I think 2022, the threshold for a state stormwater permit dropped to half an acre. So now it's the same threshold that Wolcott requires. Um, so that gap you were trying to plug locally has now been plugged at the state level. Um, and so really there's a discussion, I think, discussion of whether you still need this language. Um, Given that everything you were trying to capture on this is now regulated at the state level. And feel free to take more time than tonight to think about that if you want to. But I wanted to bring it because it is a significant state statute change that's occurred.
Well,
I have a quick, oh,
unless we wanted to make it stricter, there would be no reason to have that in there, really.
right.
I
I
I
think
don't,
really your two options are to lower it further, like to maybe a third or a quarter, or to strike it. And that's
yeah.
really, I think, up to you.
I have a question about the last part of the sentence there, as measured cumulatively over any 5-year period. Is this something that the ZA is going to be tracking? Because that's a long span of time. And if somebody, adds and adds, the DRB is probably not keeping track of that. Is that a requirement of ZAs now by the state to log impervious surface?
In theory, when in theory, I think you'd find that well, I'll change that. In theory, it's the landowner's responsibility to report, those things to the state. Um, if they're pulling permits that require it, those permits need to know that other state permits may be required. Um, Certainly, if zoning permits that don't require site plan review or subdivision review, unless the municipality has a fairly robust local tracking, it can be difficult to follow those things. Um, I have seen come up at the state level, that cumulative thing be triggered, but it's usually bigger developments.
As a part of the application process, should we maybe require the applicants to certify that they're in compliance with state level permitting as it regards to stormwater? I think we have a provision like that in our wastewater stuff, but
Would we leave it in simply to let the person that only reviews the local zoning ordinances know. I mean, over specifies was that much with the state regulations.
Right, that's what I'm thinking, is that if there's an applicant here that wants to put up a 100 by 200 building, or whatever's gonna trigger that half an acre, they're likely not gonna know that they need a stormwater permit.
Right.
So how do we get them to know that without putting it in our zoning docs? How do we get them to know and certify to the DRB or the ZA, whoever it goes to, that they are in compliance with the state?
Is there a drawback back to just leaving it in there?
Other than it makes the document longer, which I know you're not a fan of.
I'm of a mind, let the state regulate the state. We don't need to have anything to do with it.
On our applications now, does it, I think it does mention are all applicable, wastewater permits from the state in place? Like the checkbox, I think
Right.
is on there. I probably look closer.
I think it does, and I don't think we really follow up on that. That's for them the applicant to deal with.
I think, we have the review of your subdivision process. And there's a couple of options for the sequencing and how the town can track that if you want to track that. That I can put a note to discuss when we in greater detail when we get to that point. There's everything from for only the applicant's responsibility to the pulling of permits for actual construction is contingent on filing the permit to some towns check that all the permits are in place with their certificate of occupancy, which I don't believe you currently have a certificate of occupancy process. But there's a range of options, and you can kind of choose what you think is best for Wolcott. So I'll flag that as an item for discussion in the subdivision discussion.
Yeah, I'm happy to let the state regulate the state. I'm with you on that.
You're trying to do a service for the applicant.
A service for the applicant and also a service for the town. I know with some of the things, I'm a sky is falling guy. But if there was stormwater management that was done improperly, but we have a zoning permit that allowed the development to happen, there could be a liability question as to why we issued a permit if we knew or if we didn't know that all the other state level permits were in place. Things like the flood regulation things, if we allow flood development to happen, or if we allow development to happen in floodplains that don't comply with FEMA flood regs, FEMA could pull funding, not just from a property that's in violation, but from the whole town.
But do our flood regs not follow FEMA regs?
They do, but if a development that didn't comply, and that's an example of, could the state come back on the town in some way for allowing a development that didn't comply with the state level permit?
As long as we weren't specifically approving the more than half acre of impervious surfaces.
So in that case, we should remove checkboxes for all state level permitting from our zoning stuff.
Possibly.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
that way there it removes any knowledge on our part.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to the water and wastewater, we have no power over that anyway.
Right.
And apparently we have very little to no power over the impervious surfaces.
In dwelling units, it seems.
Isn't one of the conditions for like the final filing of a Mylar or a conditional use that all state permits are in place, and until then it's invalid anyway?
Yeah, but I think we've come kind of to the conclusion, and our last zoning did address this, that we were approving subdivisions for any purpose, including recreational land. I mean, there may be no state permits involved.
So by that, you mean that we make them meet the usable lot requirement, but they don't have to state what their plan for the land is.
Exactly. Somebody could come in here and say, I want to subdivide my property. I don't have any plans on building it. Maybe I'm just gonna sell it outright or whatever. Don't have a wastewater permit. Just gonna put that statement down there, this lot will need a wastewater permit, you know, but that's on their deed.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay. I'll make notes of all of that. Um, so if I'm understanding this, I think I'm generally hearing not policing whether the state permit is in place. Um, the two options then for this language are, just taking it out and it's now state issue or lowering the threshold. I haven't heard anyone jump up for lowering the threshold, but I don't want to assume that's not what. Okay. So I think I have the clear direction here. Um, so we go on to the next page that was attached. This is that the accessory apartment piece. Um, as it's currently written, it is specifically single family homes, single unit homes. Um, the change that is most significant is the size limits that were previously imposed by state statute on accessory apartments have been removed. So meaning that there used to be the requirement that it only be, a one unit or efficiency, and couldn't be more than a certain percentage of the principal home. That's no longer allowed by statute. So, um, in keeping again with that kind of 2 unit per unit thing that we talked about. So just an example of that could be, a small house with, say, a large workshop or, garage, and then a unit about the same size as that as the house over the workshop or garage would now be allowed under this.
Or even larger.
Or even larger. Yep.
Right, I mean, somebody could have a tiny house and a 2,000 square foot accessory dwelling.
They
unit.
could. That could be allowed. Yep.
Okay. So
Yep.
our picking out 800 square feet as being a reasonable size has gone out the window.
Yeah. Was a good reasonable size for about 8 years, and yes, that's what's happened now. Um, no questions on that. Moving on to the next one. Um, both page 71 and 72. Changes to the definition and what's allowed as a residential care home. Um, so the definition at the state level of a residential care home was expanded to include a crisis care home serving, um, or a crisis care home. And then depending on the number of people served, determines how a community can regulate it. So 9 or more um, requires conditional use review. Um, at the similar densities as multifamily units. And then 8 or fewer is now permitted essentially wherever single family homes are permitted. Um, that previously applied to state registered and licensed residential care homes. It's been expanded now to crisis care homes.
So by crisis care, are we referring to, like, one example is like a homeless shelter?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the I think the primary example here.
Does that also include like um, a, a residential unit for substance abuse rehabilitation?
It would, yeah.
So, sorry,
Um,
to clarify, so these are now permitted uses anywhere a single family dwelling is permitted?
Yep. So where single family if with eight or fewer people permitted anywhere single family homes are permitted. Nine or more people follows whatever review procedure you require for a multifamily. Any questions about that? Right. So this was an interesting one on page 76, and it spills over to page 77. Um, this is actually in section 510, community facilities and places of worship. This is not new statute. This has been on the books since for quite a while. It appears to have been missed the last time the bylaws were updated. And since the one who worked with you all on that, I'll take ownership of the fact that it was missed. This is language that comes fairly directly from statute, with the exception of place of worship, and I'll talk about that a little bit. Um, Essentially, what this means is that the items listed you cannot ban from the community, um, and you can have the standards of your bylaws applied to these. So they're not exempt, but the standards can essentially be modified or waived if it would get in the way of the intended function or use of the facility. So I think a good example of that would be, a hospital. Say the hospital requires a loading dock and entry area for the ER, and then imagine a site where the only place where that could be done in a way that would allow ambulances to get in safely is within the setback, um, or by changing the requirements for landscaping, um, the community would have to accept those kinds of changes. Um, the one item that is listed in statute called out separately is place of worship, um, which follows similar rules. So, an example for place of worship, your height requirements. Say there's a type of faith that requires a um, physical structure that would extend above your height limit, a minaret or a cupola or maypole or other feature. They would be allowed to do that. The other thing that's referenced here is a federal act called RLUPA, which is the Federal Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, which essentially states that you can't discriminate against places of worship based on what type of worship is occurring there. Um, and that's not directly in statute, but it is in federal law. I don't suspect that would be an issue that you would have in Wolcott, but it's healthy to have that as is it's a First Amendment and federal law issue. Do you have any questions about that?
I have a question, Seth.
Yep.
What is the difference between the fifth and sixth bullet point um, under that top section, regional solid waste management versus a waste management facility?
Good question. So, regional solid waste facilities are sort of your like bigger transfer stations and such. There are also smaller facilities that have a more limited rules of what they can take. So, for example, after this meeting tonight, I'll be phoning into Johnson to talk about going through that permitting process to allow their gravel pit to accept um, low level, low background level soils that are developed from infrastructure projects. So that's not building out like a new transfer station that's or landfill, but it's a more minor facility. So um, honestly, probably could be one bullet point, but that's mirrored what we have in statute.
So if somebody decided to open up a regional solid waste management facility, the town of Wolcott has very little say in that happening.
You would have the say to it in your zoning to which you could regulate it without impacting its intended use as a solid waste facility. Um, there is a process for the solid waste management permitting that has another process for municipal concerns. But you're correct in terms of how your municipal bylaws would apply to that.
Oh, sorry. One other question from the previous section. Crisis care. Do we have a definition of that in our bylaws, or are we referring to a state definition of what that encompasses?
I believe you will need to add a definition of that to the bylaws, and that definition will need to mirror the state definition. And I'll make a mark of that to make sure that that's included because I think I may have overlooked that when I was working on the definitions, but that should be in there. Yeah. Um, so I'm noting that it's 7. I can keep going, but I know your time was, noticed to 7. So does the commission want to keep going? We're getting close to the end, or um, pause for now.
That, that time was just something I pulled out of the air, so.
Okay, so keep going.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we got a little bit of a late start anyway.
Yeah, I know, and I apologize for that. I'm not on the agenda in Johnson till 9 o'clock, so
Okay.
I'll keep going.
Well, hopefully we're not gonna keep you here that long.
Yeah.
They start meetings at 9 o'clock at night, huh?
They start at 6:30 and just keep going. So
Jim, don't do that.
yeah. Um so the next really several pages are all of the zoning district dimensional tables revised based on um the what we talked about earlier, the requirement that 1 and 2 unit structures essentially be treated the same. Um, you'll basically see this repeated in each one of the tables. So I pause here on page 84 and just ask, does this differentiation make sense to you all? Does it communicate what it's supposed to communicate? I remove for um, maximum density of 1 or 2 units rather than 1 DU per acre, just 1 or 2 acres, 1 for every 2 acres, because it is one single unit or 2 unit structure per 2 acres that are now allowed, as opposed to requiring double density for a 2 unit. Does this table make sense how it's articulated? I know the language I just used was very convoluted. Um, So hopefully the table is more straightforward.
So it's 1 or 2 units per 2 acres maximum density. And then what the next column next to that, maximum density of greater than or equal to than 3 units? You're muted, Seth.
Yes. So it's still if three or more unit if a building contains three or more units, um, it's still each unit still requires the requisite 2 acres. Um, so that's the most restrictive approach to 3 unit or greater structures that you can do now. You're not required in the multifamily units with three or more to do the thing where 2 units count as one. You could say, you know, 2 acres plus, 1 acre per unit greater than two, for example. I'm only making the changes here that are the minimum required to comply with statute. You're allowed to go further and be more permissive of multifamily if you want.
So just so I'm clear on this, does it almost eliminate those 2 columns and make them one?
It it really means that I think in some ways it favors 2 unit structures over larger multifamily structures in that, um so I think they are still separate columns. It's just that there's no longer sort of um because really what it means is 1 unit you need 2 acres, 2 units you need 2 acres, 3 units you actually need 6 acres. There's a pretty big jump up there. um I'm trying to communicate that. I like how elegant and simple Wolcott's dimensional tables are, and I was trying to preserve that with this kind of nuanced thing. I think the question is, does it still make sense? Can you read that and get that as the requirement?
Yeah, that greater than or equal to 3 units. That's really all that clear to me.
I'm sorry, Jim. Did you say that is clear or that isn't
It's,
clear?
it's not all that clear to me. So I understand, the 1 or 2 unit, it could be a single family home or it could be a duplex.
Yeah.
But the 3 unit thing, the greater than or equal to 3 unit, okay, I guess I understand that. Anything 3 units or more, you need 2 acres for each unit, which is
Yes.
kind of weird when you could do 2 units on 2 acres.
It is kind of
Yeah,
weird.
it is
Yeah.
weird. We probably could shift and be less restrictive and say that, 2 units. I guess we would essentially just be saying it's 1 acre per unit, and that would comply, would it not?
That's what we had way back in the day.
It would be. Yeah. That would
Well,
comply. Yeah.
if we did 1 acre per unit, but we're treating single family and duplexes the same, it would still double that density. We would have to define that.
Yeah. I think that would be, I think a good way to do that would be to keep the 1 unit and 2 units in their own column, and then have sort of like what you just described as instead of two, so everyone's treated more of the same, like it does become one dwelling unit per 1 acre. It's half of the requirement basically. I think
Yeah, so but if you have like three dwelling units, one of them's a single family home and the other's a duplex. And all of a sudden you need like three times as much land as you need if you have a duplex only.
it yeah, I think I'll play around with the chart a little bit, but I think I get what you're trying to. Yeah, I think I understand what you're suggesting.
The other language I would be interested in seeing would be, and I think it was Maxfield that asked, these are contiguous floor plans when we're discussing
Contiguous.
this.
Yeah,
Uh, so a 1 or 2 unit attached or a 3 unit attached, because again, talking about
yeah.
having 3 single-family homes, I'm not opposed to seeing a 6 acre requirement necessarily. I don't know how
Mhm.
that plays out. But if we're gonna do a duplex and a single family or even two duplexes, I don't know that they need to have.
Right, so yeah, if we clarified that, so that it was all one building or not, yeah.
And I don't know how to do that and maintain the simplicity of the table, but
Yeah, I think the making sure that it's clear that those are attached, not yeah, that's a really important need to make sure that that ties back to the definitions and clearly that it's attached. Okay. So the next table is the same for the shorelands, and I think likely the same discussion of modifying these tables as you've discussed to reflect the multifamily density and to reflect that the multifamily means attached, not standalone units. Um, and I think same in the next one, Route 15 corridor, except that we're working with a minimum lot size of 1 acre instead of two. And then going on to village where you have differentiations based on the street. I'll do the same thing there. Um, Fisher Bridge, same there. Stop me if I'm going too fast. I'm just being consistent. Um, and then if there's nothing on those tables, the last significant change for definitions, other than I think based on your comments, we really do need to probably spend some time ensuring that the dwelling unit is clear that it's attached. So we'll spend time on that. But for tonight, what I've given you, the state definition of affordable housing was revised for owner occupied housing to be based on households earning 120% of county median income as opposed to 80% of median income. And that change is driven by the fairly rapid increase in cost of owner occupied housing. So what that means is, for example, some of your provisions have incentives for affordable housing. If it's ownership based, it would be what we traditionally think of as missing middle housing as opposed to what would previously be thought of as low income in terms of percentage. Missing middle being that 80% of median income to 120% versus less than 80%. Um, does that make sense? I threw lots of math and percentages and census terms in as the for the last item. So, um,
So this new affordable housing definition, that would affect like our housing bonus that we give, our density bonuses that we give in our PUD type things that we have.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be, I think, where this would come into the play and we'll cut the most is that PUD density bonus.
I can put that all in the minutes.
I'm not making minutes.
Yeah. Um, so that is it for the S100 changes. You'll see I'll clean these up. I'll focus especially on those tables and the housing definitions. Um, there will also be, when we look at this sort of the next time, your PUD density calculations, I didn't open those up because they would kind of be impacted by how you did the density for multifamily here. And you've given clear direction there, so I'll bring those for next time. Um, the other item I put on for you all tonight was the initial discussion of the subdivision standards. Um, I had shared some examples of um, administrative subdivision review processes for from other communities. Administrative subdivision is now enabled in statute. You're not required to have it, but you are allowed to have it. That's where up to some threshold subdivisions can be um, issued and approved by the zoning administrator as opposed to the DRB process. I also shared the current application requirements. And one feature you'll note in many of the examples I shared was whether or not um, administrative subdivision is um, enabled or not. Some communities still have DRB review for smaller subdivisions, but a shorter kind of simplified application for those smaller subdivisions. So there's lots of pieces to consider. First is that um, is that administrative subdivision something that makes sense for Wolcott? Um, is some kind of differentiation between minor and major something you want to consider? And then do you want to consider and open up the application requirements regardless of the answer to those two questions? Um, So I think that's sort of an initial discussion for tonight. Would be great to have some direction about some of the options you'd like to consider so I can work on um, language for you to think about.
So I personally think administrative review on smaller subdivisions would be a great idea. It probably would require the proper personnel to do it.
And funding. Uh, Right now, I think the line item for the zoner is like 6 hours. No, we don't see that many subdivisions.
Well, the thing about it is, though, if we also simplify the subdivision process, it could actually be literally as simple as looking at a building permit application.
Right. And I'm hugely in favor of defining minor and major and making minor ones so much less involved.
Yes.
Um,
Road frontage, acreage.
the bullet points that we always go through.
Right. The question is, at what level would we do that? So Seth, I'm pretty sure I know the answer of this, but towns that have no zoning, what level of how many subdivisions can they have before Act 250 kicks in, as opposed to towns like us who have zoning?
I believe the threshold is 6 versus 10.
Okay. Yeah, I would go so far as to propose that a minor subdivision is up to 6 lots. Because we're actually making it more strict here than in other towns that do not have zoning.
Yeah, I agree with both of you, but Michael's question was the same one that I had. You know, is the select board willing to, you know, increase the hour salary, et cetera, for somebody to potentially, like, yeah, we don't have a ton of these, but that doesn't mean we may not in the future. And, you know, somebody looking at a 6 lot subdivision, you know, that could take a significant amount of time depending on how complicated the layout is.
Well, it can, and if there's any question to it, you just turn it over to the DRB. And then we try to figure it out.
I did notice that, yeah, in one of the towns here, I forget which one it was, it did say that the ZA or whoever's reviewing these has the right to say, this is, you know, above my comfort level. I want the DRB to review it. It wasn't Killington. I forget which one it was, but.
Right, but we would have to really simplify the plat review requirements.
Would you entertain, because to me, 6 feels like a lot. I don't know why I think that, but I just have a hesitation at 6. I would be interested in seeing, yeah, are you in there, like an acreage? Is there a size? I mean, because if we take 500 acres and carve it into 6 pieces and they don't have a listed use, to me, that's different than taking, and again, I'll pick on Brookview because it's the only development around here that has had some recent activity. It's different than taking a 10-acre chunk there and carving that into 6 units in a, you know, an already for Wolcott fairly densely populated area.
Yeah, well, you know, I threw the 6 lots out there. That's my opinion. I mean, that, to me, that's a compromise. No, you know, I'm not married to that by any means.
Yeah, the number I had in my head was 3 because I feel like the bulk of what we do on the DRB is 3-lot subdivisions.
This is true.
And I think that if we simplified a 3-lot subdivision and made it an administrative review, the select board is, at some point, we're gonna have to swallow the requirements. We're gonna have to come to terms with the fact that we are going to have to. I mean, Tom's going to retire at some point, and I don't think that we can fill Tom's position at the rate that we're paying it to begin with.
Mhm.
We are gonna have to swallow that at some point. So I don't wanna make a zoning regulation that fits our current staff, knowing that, you know, he's reaching an age where I would assume he'd want to retire at some point.
So having these zoning regulations, it's always going to be an issue. Right? So other towns that I'm aware of, the DRB meets, they may not even be all that aware of what zoning is. The zoning administrator sits there and tells them, this is what you can do, what you can't do. These are the things, you know, you can put conditions on. So I don't, as long as we're going to have zoning and subdivision, we're always going to need a ZA.
Yeah. Right.
You know, if we think about how much time we spend on these subdivisions, if we were to just come in here and look at a subdivision and say it's got road frontage, it's got acres, the lot shape isn't crazy. it's good to go. We really wouldn't spend a lot of time on that. And neither should a zoning administrator. Somebody that's doing that all the time really should know the rules better than we do.
Well, they need to be documented. It's just not in their head. You need to have a simple document that the zoning administrator can watch through.
Yes, the zoning.
Simple document.
Yeah.
There's, everything is complicated for a reason, things are written down like that. All that language is in there for a reason. You start.
But you can't have it both ways. You really need to have either use the complicated one or design a simple one.
But Bruce, this is not that complicated. I would imagine that this is written to a sixth grade level, just like a newspaper is.
Which is,
The zoning.
I just wonder if a zoning administrator makes his or her way through the whole thing and understands it. And somebody comes in and they go, yeah, sure, I know all that. I'm suggesting
The
that,
zoning
well, whatever.
administrator should. It's kind of minimal.
Seth, do any municipalities ever contract out if their ZA is either they can't hire one or the ZA is busy doing other things? I don't even know what our ZA's job description is exactly, but
There have been communities that have sort of contracted out ZA services. There's also some precedent for communities sort of co-hiring um, zoning administrators so that someone has a more stable job and more hours. Hasn't been done as much in Lamoille County, but I think the some in Washington County. There are some people who do that. Franklin County, the Regional Planning Commission hires someone not as a person who's on staff, but sort of does that, joint hiring process for, I think, 3 or 4 towns. I'm not familiar as how much that's worked or how well it's worked, but there's models out there. And it's not quite this, but the Village of Hyde Park just signed a contract with the Town of Hyde Park for the Town of Hyde Park zoning administrator to be the village's zoning administrator as well. Um, so a little bit different because it's a village within a town, but there is a contract not to the individual, but to the town as an organization.
am I imagining this? Did we explore this at some point in the past with the town of Elmore? Maybe it was just a discussion at some point, sharing a ZA.
Um, I recall that too. Um, I don't recall the details of whether it was just a thought or whether it went further than that.
So are we at the point where we kind of have some ideas, but structurally we need to know what our administrative situation is going to look like before we can make any of these serious decisions? Or like Jim said, we know that at some capacity, the town is obligated to, appoint or hire or whatever, somebody in that position, whatever form it takes.
I think there's kind of two pieces. I think I have the direction for coming up with a draft of language to review. I think, and I can work on that up and into a date that is rapidly approaching. Um, and I think there's um, also a discussion internally of the zoning administrator capacity. And this is a piece of that. I know that it's um and that's would be a good discussion, I think, so everybody's, um would be better. My thought is to engage with the select board on it early rather than come with a zoning bylaw amendment that really relies on expanded ZA capacity before they've had the discussion about whether that's the direction to go.
Yeah, or any CA capacity. We're gonna have to, I mean, like you said, you can't even replace Tom for what he's doing now.
I mean, we obviously haven't tried, but I think we will struggle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So select board does have a meeting on Wednesday. It's late to get on the agenda, but I can make an amendment and just throw this out there in passing that we're considering that and that it might cause budgetary questions on our next budget round if we did decide to go through with that.
Michael, will you add, I mean, I know I threw Elmore out there, but there's a bunch of other podunk towns in the county, like, Belvedere and Waterville, Eden. They're probably in similar situations that we are.
Yeah, and I like the idea of co-hiring. I think some of those other towns don't have zoning at all. We might be the only podunk one with a ZA. So I'm not sure how that would work really,
So
but
that's something AI could do, Bruce. Feed it into the computer.
well, and that's you're smiling, but that's
pretty simple.
the checklist is yes or no. I mean, it's binary. Does it meet these requirements? It really doesn't need a human. It truly doesn't.
Yeah, the ZA cannot like interpret. They have to follow what the rules say.
And I think that if the information in that document were organized in a either more cohesive or easier to digest way, that it would be really, really simple for administrative approval. Reading through that 130 some odd page document where some things contradict others and you have to go through and say, well, it is a small subdivision, so I don't need PUDs, but I do need the building permit, but I do need the stormwater permit because there are so many moving parts organized in so many different places. That's where it gets hairy. It's not that the language is hard to interpret.
Right, but when we're talking simple subdivision, making that plat review very simple. Like,
I mean, even conditional use could be, it's binary. Does it agree with the document? Yes or no? They're very simple questions. It really, for a lot of things, doesn't require a great deal of review. So for enough aboard, I think.
that's what I'm trying to do. So do you need any other input, Seth?
I think I have good direction. I think so I have good direction for subdivision. I can work on um try something based on the feedback. Use 3 as a placeholder. That number can change up or down. Work on reorganizing the checklist and go from there. So I think for me, the only other item for tonight is the timing of your June meeting. I don't know when my leave is going to begin. If it hasn't begun by June 1, things are going to be very challenging here. So, but I do know I will still be, unfortunately, everyone else at LCPC is deployed on June 1. I don't quite know how that happened, but it did. So I think the options are, I can try to get you something to review and fly alone with it, which I'm sure you're all capable of. We could try to change a different time in June, or you guys could have the first meeting of the summer off. It's really up to you how you want to go about it.
I'd vote for a bit of a recess myself.
Okay.
A lot of times it's hard to get a quorum here in the summer anyway.
Okay.
So you're taking June, just June off or more than that?
So it's gonna be um it's gonna be a 3 week full-time leave followed by another 3 weeks of part-time. Um so if I'm doing my math right, I think I will be back by your July meeting. But we may maybe check in on that unless you want a full 2 months off. And then August I'll definitely be back by then. And I will note your July meeting, I think, is the 4th of July weekend. So um you may all, for your own reasons, want.
Right. Um, yeah, again, I don't have a problem taking some time off from this.
Okay.
We've been meeting pretty steadily for a couple of years now. So,
We don't have any like grant funding time constraints.
The work on the bylaws needs to be completed by next May, so you're doing okay. You're doing fine with that.
yeah, we're not going page by page this time, right? I mean,
Right.
in the past, we've done that, basically, really.
Mhm.
So. Okay, anybody else got anything to bring up for the evening?
I do have a question from the select. We have we're noticing some holes in our driveway permitting and highway standards process. There have been some slightly more complicated applications, and we're discussing changing the way that those are done. There are a lot of options on the table. One of them is to pull them from highway department and make them select board specific problems, meaning an applicant would have to wait for a meeting and go through the process.
For like a driveway permit?
Yep. There is discussion about kicking them to the DRB. There is discussion about kicking them to the ZA. There's a discussion of some kind of hybrid for all three. The problem that we are finding is that the highway department feels that their jurisdiction stops at the edge of the right of way, but the highway standards dictate driveway. They define driveways and have slope requirements and different things. And our highway standards also point to requiring compliance with all other state permitting requirements, stream crossings, things like this. And then also in our zoning docs, there is driveways over 1,500 feet requiring DRB approval, conditional use approval. But I think that language is going to depend on how 181 gets decided. So I was asked if I would bring that up to the PC and see what the board's thoughts and feelings were. Because we are going to have to open the driveway permit, we're going to have to open the highway ordinance, and we're going to have to open the zoning docs in order to address the holes that we found in culvert maintenance and whose jurisdiction is what and what we do and don't regulate.
So are you asking us to weigh in on who's gonna do like culvert maintenance?
Well, I mean, yes, more information is always better. If anybody has an opinion, the select board would love to hear that.
Private property is private responsibility. If that driveway, if that culvert is specific to that driveway.
Okay. Even if it's inside town right away.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this has gone back and forth over the years.
Which is probably why none of our documents agree with each other.
Yeah. I don't know if anything was ever official.
Yeah.
You know, one road commissioner will come up and replace a bunch of culverts, and 2 years later, nobody's replacing culverts.
I think I shouldn't speak for the whole board, but I think that the board's leaning is in that direction. With the caveat being that the town would reserve the right to replace a culvert at the town's cost during major roadway improvements, right? If they come by and ditch at your house, we're not going to
If
make
they
you buy a culvert.
change water flow pattern, I can see that, yeah.
So that's the feeling that we have there, but there's an example nearby that, the driveway permit, the way the process works now is the applicant sees the highway foreman gives the preliminary okay to start construction, but the highway foreman doesn't at this point really have the authority to enforce zoning regulations or highway standards or lot lines is the one that came up most recently. So the highway foreman okays the construction of the driveway, and then the permit is finalized after select board review. So it's at that point, after construction, when the work is completed, that the select board would then theoretically review that it meets zoning docs, highway standards, and complies with all the outline things that it needs to, setbacks and different things. Historically, that hasn't been the way that it has worked. They have just been a rubber stamp. The application comes in, Dylan goes out and says line of sight is good, and they get through with it. We have one going on right now where they are putting a driveway in across land where they don't have a deeded access, but they do have verbal agreement. We as a town have no record of that, but we've approved the construction to begin, and the construction has begun. We also have a verbal understanding from the applicant that they have received all of the state stream crossing things that they need to, and culvert sizings that they need to cross the two substantial streams that they need to cross. We as a town have no written proof of that. We also, visually driving by, it seems to me that it is steeper than what our highway standards allow. But again,
Do we regulate driveways to that effect?
it's written in there.
It's not anything that we've reviewed during my time. It must have been in there like that for the last many years.
I was gonna say, I know it's in there for private roads, but I do believe it's also in there for projects.
My culvert needs replacing, and I was told a couple years ago, the town said, sure, we're gonna replace it. Subsequently, in their big rainstorm, it washed out just a shitload of road because it hadn't been replaced.
Yeah,
I mean, I will replace it, as I should have before.
Bruce, that was the question that I thought of. If access to a lot has an inadequate culvert, but it causes damage to the town road, who's responsible for, obviously, you could say the landowner's responsible for replacing their culvert, but then all the extra work that arose out of the inadequate culvert. And then I guess that takes it back. Was the town responsible for replacing the culvert in the first place?
so the town, at least when I got a driveway permit a long time ago, they told me how big of a culvert to put in. Now, if the road washes out because that culvert was too small, that's the town's problem. Unless I did something else to cause a mess,
Yeah.
It's a bit the same with me. I mean, I was told they would definitely replace it and didn't do it. So I would say, hey, they told me that they were going to replace it.
That's what they told you, yeah. I don't,
But there's no document. So
well, yeah.
anyway, I'm sure it needs some work.
So I had a document that said you're gonna have an 18-inch culvert.
Right.
It wasn't a road foreman at the time, but a road guy come up. He was on the road crew, says, you don't need a culvert here. I didn't put one in. Years later, they come back to me. My neighbor up the road had wanted to change the culvert up there to run the water down towards me, and they said, well, you gotta put a culvert in. So I said, okay, I'll put a culvert in. But you're gonna have to replace all these culverts all the way down to the
Right.
Tamarack Brook, and there's about 10 of them.
Yeah.
Cause I'm sending all this water you're sending to me.
Yeah, I'm putting an 18 in.
No culvert.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, and right now in our highway standards, we're regulating driveway widths, we're regulating turning radiuses, we're regulating the approach angles to the road, we're regulating I mean, there's a bunch of stuff in there for driveways.
Well, perhaps we ought to drop those driveway standards down to just the interface of the road. That dip coming off the road.
And the rest of it being, but that's a conversation we've got to have with emergency management, because a lot of this is in there to make sure that it's, and
This is true, and I am a supporter of that, because I've been on a lot of roads that, it's like, how are we getting out of here, you know?
And I am also, my opinion, for as little as it's worth, is the jurisdiction stops at the end of the right of way. Whatever you do beyond there, it's like the power company, we don't care what happens after the meter. I am also of that brain.
Becomes an enforcement issue as it is when we require, when people are building roads to subdivide off, and we're requiring them to build it to standards. Well, there's no enforcement of that either.
There's not even a certification.
Right.
We have a good faith agreement that they're going to try their best. Thanks, buddy.
Right. But, if they go on to sell property and then that road turns to be subpar, there's some suing that could go on, not to us, but to the landowner.
Yeah. So when we have the meeting on Wednesday and they ask for an update, is it fair to say that the planning / DRB, we're not interested in having driveway permits come to us? We're not interested in complicating that
That's
process.
beyond our scope.
Okay.
Those should be held, done by somebody with some road knowledge.
Would the planning, because I believe I don't know that we would need planning approval, but would the planning commission or DRB support the removal of some of these driveway standards? Should we decide to go that route? A discussion further on that?
When you bring up the emergency vehicle thing, that's,
I don't even know that we would be allowed to. I don't know if that would put us in violation of some kind of agreement we have, with national insurance programs or different things. I don't know that we would be able to know that.
Yeah, I mean, some of those are also in there for safety, right? Like if you got a steep driveway dumping down into a town road, and you're not adequately sanding the thing in the dead of winter.
And we see that all the time.
Yeah.
So we're not regulating that. We're not enforcing it.
Right.
My view is if we're going to have regulations, we should be enforcing them or don't have them.
Yeah.
Like, going uptown hill, there's at least half a dozen roads that dump right into the town road. And when it rains, the gravel goes out.
We have issues on Pond Road with everything on the uphill side.
Yeah. And back when I got my driveway permit, it's supposed to slope away from the road for a certain number of feet.
Yeah.
Like 20 feet or something like
Yeah,
that.
I think
It's a significant amount.
Yeah, I think it's 20 feet with a 3% slope away.
Yeah.
Okay, any ideas on how to streamline that application process or better enforce the regulations that are on the books?
As far as the application for the driveways.
As far as application for the driveways, proving compliance and whose ultimate responsibility they are, because the highway foreman is convinced, the highway department, the whole department is convinced that that's outside of their purview, and they're not going to do lot line research to make sure that the applicant is asking for permission on their own land.
It's kind of, again, a zoning administrator thing, really.
Okay.
Just as the zoning administrator is supposed to come and check your building to make sure your setback is right, they should also be looking at that driveway.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in terms of the application goes in, and like you're saying, Michael, that it's rubber stamped for approval, but there should be a system where until it meets, the engineering that is handed in with the application, it's not certified. And then you have X amount of time to complete it. And then maybe you're in violation if you don't.
And that's how the process is. It wasn't how it was done when I first joined, but that's how we've amended things to be now. I'm not sure what being in violation means in realistic everyday terms. I'm not sure what that looks like, but
So it's probably the same as for like not getting any other permit where they can't get a clear title search for a mortgage.
yeah,
That's the interface with our roads that we should really be regulating. I mean, we can regulate the rest, but as far as enforcement goes,
yeah,
it's that 20 feet.
okay. All right. Well, like I said, I will, I'll just let them know, I'll let Michelle know that, we are leaning towards it really should fall on the ZA shoulders, is what I'm hearing. They're the person that's gonna be able to know the lot lines. They have access to all these documents. I do think the highway foreman should be involved. Or road commissioner or whoever is in that
In the
position.
interface of the road, absolutely.
Uh,
Because that's a hazard for the road.
Well, and who's gonna know better about culvert sizing in hydraulically connected segments? You know, highway foreman or ZA.
Right. As it is, I don't think our ZA is going to do with that.
No, but
But I mean, they can go and, the setbacks and things like that. I don't see them, pulling out a site level to check grade.
no. Okay, all right. Well, that satisfies what I said that I would ask, so.
Okay, any other business? Do I have a motion to end the meeting?
I'll make that motion.
Second?
I'll say.
All right, all in favor of ending the meeting, say aye.
Aye.
It's adjourned. It's soon 7 o'clock.
He's still.
No problem. Thank you.
This is what I sent to you and Seth, and you can read it over or not. It was simply, Seth didn't send it out. That's okay. Maybe you didn't see it. It's just simply a combination of all of those, just but 2-minute combination of all those towns' documents that's sent. Read it as.
I can see one problem right here, a minor subdivision.
You're gonna see lots of problems in there, Jim. It really was just thrown in, and you, like I said, you can either use it or you can wordsmith the next one
Okay,
or not use it.
okay. But lot line adjustments, subdivisions are completely different.
But I thought maybe it was you doing some kind of a service to avoid lots of time wordsmithing. But if people don't want to look at it, I'm happy with that.
All right.
I still want to see, even if it's at a state level, because they have that permit portal. They have it's a super binary shit ass website. It's a horrible website. But they have like a permit portal, depending on what you want to do. You go through and you fill out the criteria and it pumps out what you need to know.
Yeah.
I would love to see something like that with a little bit more AI agent in it. And that also ties into the local zoning. I mean, again, we're in 2026, we should be able to do that without a whole lot of human oversight. At least the first draft, the first pass.
Yeah.
of these.
The beauty of this would be the culvert issue and the road issue is to bring all those documents together and let AI, do some stuff with it. And I don't know,